Hello and welcome to today's presentation, 7 Steps to Build a Highly Interactive Enterprise Mobile App in 45 Days. Today's presentation is being brought to you by Magnet Systems, Inc. It is my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today's presentation. Joining us is Renu Upadhyay, Senior Director, Product Marketing, and Tom Koo, Senior Vice President of Enterprise Mobility. Renu, welcome and thank you for joining us today. The floor is yours and you can now take it away.
Thank you so much, Kyle. Hello, everyone. We're really excited to share some interesting trends today in the enterprise mobile app space. And then we're also happy to have Tom here, our resident expert working closely with our enterprise customers, where Tom will share the 7 basic steps that any IT department in an enterprise can take to build and deploy an enterprise mobile app that is not only very engaging, but very interactive to drive adoption and usage in just 45 days. So without further ado, let's just get started. So as you can see, this should not come as a shock to anyone, but from this very iconic picture at the Pope's address, it's clear that in today's world, mobile has won. As consumers, we all utilize these little computers that we carry around in our pockets or in our purses to do tasks we never even thought were possible, not even 5 or let alone 2 years ago. But when we really think about it and extend that experience into your workplace, you see that this victory has not really translated in the enterprise workplace. Now, sure, a lot of us use our mobile phones to call people, call colleagues, and reach out to them instead of the desk phones. But a lot of times, our mobile experience really just stops at that. We still rely on our laptops to get most of our work done, even though we know that this market is changing a lot. And there's so many stats coming out all the time if you even sign up for a Google alert. But I just thought it would be interesting to share these 3 stats that are very sort of top of mind from my perspective. The first is around digital natives, right? We know that the new generation says that rather than getting a free lunch, that they would rather that the business not only just give them a smartphone, but really allow them to get their work done from that smartphone. So they'd rather the company pay for that than pay for a free lunch. The other very interesting stat, which we all know about this whole trend around BYOD, is that a large percentage, 70%, expect to bring their devices into work. And also, when we start looking at these digital natives, in just 10 years, millennials are going to make up 75% of the workforce. So when you start to think about these millennials, let's just take a moment, right? These are people who haven't ever really wired up their laptop to an Ethernet port. A lot of them haven't ever used a keyboard on their smartphone or even used Microsoft Outlook. So with that perspective in mind, why is it so hard then that businesses are failing in this move to mobile? So what is it that's going on that's preventing this consumerization effect that we see to translate into business? Our theory is that it's hard. It is really hard. Because when you look at some of these stats, there are not only competing priorities, even though the hype around mobile has been around, and a lot of companies rush to build those mobile apps, a lot of them are just frankly languishing on the shelves because they're not very attractive, they're not very user-friendly. And then even though you create one app, who's going to create the backlog of 10 to 20 apps that other departments might be wanting? And in many cases, you don't have the right resources, with the developers that you need to build these mobile apps as well. And you're not able to hire at the speeds that are needed or even have the right set of technical skills to connect to backend systems to truly make these apps useful in an enterprise scenario. So this is where Magnet comes in. So at Magnet, we really believe that this mobile revolution has really yet to hit the enterprise in a mainstream way. It's there in fits and starts, but it's definitely not mainstream. And we also believe that if you really want to make anything mainstream, we think that all good mobile will start with messaging. And here's why we think that, because if you really take a look at the top 6 apps out of the 10 consumer apps that are out there, they're all messaging-based apps. And the reason for that is that messaging-based apps like Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, and so on, they really create an experience that's a lot more human, a lot more engaging, and it really keeps those interactions going So even for your enterprise users, whether you're looking to connect to your employees or whether you're looking to connect to consumers of your business, those kinds of messaging-based apps are what will keep those people engaged, and that's what will get them coming back, to drive usage and adoption. So just want to take a quick moment to give you an overview of Magnet and where we play in this space. So Magnet's goal is to really enable businesses to build those highly interactive messaging-based apps. Our solution is very agile, so we provide developers with the tools so they can simply plug and play and embed messaging into their app, into their existing apps or new apps they may build. We're also flexible. We realize from an IT perspective, you want choice. You wanted the flexibility of deploying in the cloud or going with the cloud option or deploying on premise, and so we provide that option. We're scalable and secure, especially when you start to think about extending to not just your employees, but also to your customers, your end users. We realize that scale is very important, and security. So the ability to guarantee message delivery so you can have that information for auditing purposes, and also complying with typical IT governance policies that you may have to go through as you look to deploy a mobile strategy in your business. So our platform is designed keeping all these things in mind, and also keeping in mind that everything we do it first on mobile. So it's really around optimizing that mobile experience from the get-go, from the design up. So with that brief introduction, I'd like to pass over the conversation to Tom. So as I mentioned earlier, Tom works with our top enterprise customers, and he's collected sort of all his experience, and based on that, he's going to share the 7 key steps that he found can really help you take that mobile app and build it in 45 days.
Thank you, Renu. Just to recap what we have said, making elegant and enterprise-ready mobile applications today is really difficult. There are a couple of reasons for that, because coming from a web experience, we seem to take the entire business process, design it, lay it out, and be able to deliver application for the enterprise that way. Mobile, however, is fundamentally different. The user interaction is different, the user population, and because the consumer are so familiar with this device, the expectation is quite different. What I'd like to go through is how Magnet has approached this particular problem, and then be able to parallel certain process, but the fundamental idea is that we parallel certain development process and with a fast approach to what we call iterative design. You're constantly designing and developing at the same time, and while looking over the deployment process while you're in development. With that said, I'd like to move forward a little bit in our case study. One of our companies have talked to us, engaged us to look at workforce productivity. The whole point is that they have a diverse workforce that's out in the field. They have almost no way to provide secure communication to their employees where they're on the move, where there could be in a field organization or in a sales situation. Having a laptop there just wasn't possible. They want to be able to increase their productivity, also to control the communication in that process to become a corporate asset rather than just information that's shared on social reasons. In this particular demo I'm going to show you or walk you through it is a company that we have simulated, just an artificial company, Belafonte. But the idea is that some of the key features they want to do is that since we have so many workforce out in the field, they have quite a bit of information about how the product is being used. And they like to crowdsource that information and be able to challenge their employees to get that information back to corporate. This will affect product development, obviously product marketing, but the whole point is that you're engaging corporate with the field people much more efficiently. The second thing they want to do is that they want to provide this communication in a real-time fashion. It is horribly wrong in modern days to have some competitive feedback that shows up 2 quarters later when you realize you have a chance to modify or enhance your product to be much more competitive in the marketplace. That employee collaboration was not only meant for individuals to talk to each other, the employees, but also talk to corporate, but to do so in a timely fashion. And in supporting that, this is where messaging comes in. When we say messaging is the backbone of all mobile applications, we propose that all applications should have the ability for users not only communicate to a business process, but they have the ability to talk to each other or to the management to clarify things, to move things forward. The whole point about workflow is the idea that every step of the way, the workflow responds to the user requirement, not the other way around. And one of the ways to do that is that if you ask certain information or insert a particular question to the field or ask them to do something, you have fairly real-time feedback on information. Whether it's a yes or no question, whether it's a survey or chat, we want to promote that kind of communication because we come to expect that from a mobile device. So with that in mind, the information is presented not only on mobile, but also does what we call real-time feedback on products. Information is not only collected on the back end, it's presented to the front end in what I call very consumable fashion. Whether there is just a simple rating, I like or do not like something, where you tag something or not, but also do quick summaries where 65% or 62% in this particular case is immediate display. The idea of information dashboard should be readily available if you are collecting all that information real time. And that's a major difference between using a mobile phone to produce work versus the web. That information retrieval is not that real time. So to formalize this a little bit, I like to talk about the 7 steps to build a better enterprise mobile app in 45 days. But in doing so, I want to sort of anchor you with 2 thoughts. In order to shorten the time, you have to have a good business process in mind. The good business process has to take the approach of mobile first. That means all the business flows, the interaction, stuff like that has to be thought out in what we call mobile moments. You have to look for things that are critical in the decision-making process or in the information process that the mobile can contribute. Once that is done, your requirements definition should be much more precise, not just transactional information, but exactly what is actually being captured, being shared, being collaborated, or in that matter, crowdsourced from a corporation point of view. The requirements should be very focused on mobile in a way that is defined, not in the flow, but it could be what you call just milestones of mobile moments. And then in these mobile moments, you define your requirements in terms of information, interaction, and all the feedback necessary to move on. Obviously, in mobile, design is very, very important. And the reason is user interaction is probably the majority reason why people stick with a particular application or not. In the design stage, we try to promote the idea of use as much of the screen space for textual information, but on top of that, the images, the videos should all come at appropriate time. The design stage for us is really important, and we use quite a bit of, obviously, current graphics capabilities to do that. We're promoting the idea of going way beyond just web page design, where everything is laid out from page to page to page, but much more of what I call meaningful screens, where information is presented not only in an attractive fashion, but very intuitive fashion. Moving beyond, of course, the design is the idea of prototyping. This is one of the key points of the 7 steps. In terms of prototyping, we are not a big subscriber of wireframe, because wireframing takes quite a bit of analytics to get the whole process laid out. We're much more in an iterative process where we will design and prototype and get right back to the user, say, is this what you're looking for? Is this interaction satisfactory? Do you get the information that you need at this particular time to basically complete the transaction or complete the business process? The prototyping process happens actually throughout most of the 45 days. It's continually from beginning to end. It doesn't mean you have a moving goalpost in terms of design and prototyping. It means that there's a lot of fundamental infrastructure stuff you can be building while you're doing the front-end design. Because with all good mobile apps, there is a definite distinction between what's happening on the client side and some of the infrastructure necessary for the back end, including databases, connectivities, and user management. That can all happen while you're still working on the client, the front-end design. And step number 4 is quite important. When the front end and the back end get together, business process and interactions are now being integrated. So now we start the validation stage. Now the user can play with the application. They can see some of the basic information being presented. They can actually go walk through the entire use case and be able to see if they achieve the business goal that they intended to do. The validation process, sometimes, as you can see in this 45 days, it happened very early on in the design phase. However, the validation process gives you the finality of, I'm done with this design, I'm now ready to stabilize and go into development. The development process, although it's step number 5, has really started from the back end almost from day 1. In terms of user authentication, profiles, how will you use the application, that design process is broken down to client-server development. In the server development, it happens very early on in terms of backend information needs and also any kind of integration you might have in your mobile front end. So in the development process, you finish up the integration between client and server and be able to authenticate the user case requirements so you can validate. And here's the major point of developing stack. Obviously, in mobile, there's not that many standards out there. iOS promote their Xcode development, and Android obviously does it with theirs. However, instead of writing everything in the entire stack from the operating system up to the user interface, we definitely promote the idea of using component systems. Magnet produced the messaging component to facilitate all the chat, notification, and all the publish subscribe communication paradigm that you might want to expose in your application. So the easy, fast development that we're proposing is that you integrate with these key major component systems from major vendors. For example, if you're exploring payments, obviously you will look at a payment provider. We are a messaging provider. By using these components, you have a much more secure but a much more modular process to your development. So you're not worried about the entire stack.
And just to add to that, Tom, I remember when we went to the conference, we actually had developers who came by and they said for them to build the messaging stack themselves took up to a year, right? So you have to think about where your competency lies. Is your competency more in identifying that workflow, identifying that use case and the user interaction, the value you provide versus building each element of the stack yourself from the get-go?
That is absolutely true, Renu. If you think about today, would you go out there and write your payment system from scratch? That is obviously not security. You will go for a vendor. Device management, you go for a vendor. Our proposal today, and actually our very strong statement today, is that messaging is not something you will write from scratch. Messaging is a component system that you integrate with your software, not to only move things faster, but is much more reliable and much more scalable. From enterprise perspective, it brings the enterprise quality of reliability and scalability to the process. So your application does not deal with what I call back-end issues. Once it's deployed, and all of a sudden you're dealing with all the issues of how do I scale this to the next 100,000 users. So user testing is actually quite interesting, is that we propose user testing almost from day one. But obviously, depending on what type of application you're doing from iOS, we're a strong believer, and in just today's situation, there's quite a bit of test flight information going back and forth, so you can actually test within your app store. Obviously, there's a lot of corporations that has mobile device management system in place, so they can actually have their own app store. But in Android, that's much easier to do. With Apple, we use test flight. In that process, we do our submission quite early, so we can continue that integration and testing. We do not submit at the end of our process. We actually submit our application to test flight very early on to reduce the cycle. And then every time we get to upgrade, the entire alpha and beta testing is done almost, I would say, the beginning of the development cycle. So again, coming back to the iterative process, we constantly go back to user to validate what we want. This is not the only way you can achieve reasonable results and quality results in the short 45 days that we're proposing. So finally, in releasing your app, we've spent quite a bit of time on releasing the apps. Obviously, releasing app in the App Store, if you're writing a B2C application, a B2B application, you will have to consider alternatives into either MDM, App Store, or a test flight situation where you might want to limit the population down to maybe 30. So releasing the app, you have to put time in your schedule to basically submit that to Apple for approval, and obviously to Android, Google Play. So that process is actually mostly out of our control, meaning that time you have to plan into your schedule. Is not something a developer can monitor, but we did that very early on in our process, so we can submit it. The reason is, obviously, you're familiar with this. There's constant update once you load something from the App Store, which we're okay with that. So nearly at halfway through our development, once we're stable, we submit the application, and once it's approved, we just basically maintain updates from that point on. So in order to if I may summarize, to build a highly engaging mobile application in 45 days, you have to look at your design and your business requirements. These mobile moments will finally turn into a mobile minute, meaning most business processes on mobile phones probably conducted in less than a minute. It has to be simple, intuitive, and critical to the business process. Once that design is done, I propose that we the prototyping and the iterative process of development puts into place. So there's constant iteration of development and validation. quite a bit of work on testing and releases, but because mobile community is very familiar with that idea, I would say take advantage of that. Put that early on in your process instead of waterfalling the entire development cycle. I definitely suggest moving that cycle forward in the process. So by the time you're done, you're not gated by the deployment of an App Store application. Then I want to finalize this point is that consider modern component application mobile. I know there are not many standards in mobile development right now, but first to avoid writing the entire software stack. Second, find competent and also component applications, component systems that will help you build enterprise application in 45 days.
Yeah, that's great. So when I look at this app and what you built for this particular customer, you would call it as a native app, right? So,
yes.
If you can maybe clarify for the audience why we went that route versus considering other options like hybrid.
Right, exactly. Actually, the industry has been back and forth on this for quite some time, for the last 2 years or so. On the very basic of it, you have the mobile web application, mobile web, and then hybrid, and then finally native. Our particular theory is that because of the strong demand on users based on the usage of consumer application, mobile application, if it's based on mobile web, first of all, it's not very interactive. You constantly have screen real estate issues and shifting of sizes and components. And secondly is that it's a very, very small process. Think of a web technology completely deployed on a completely different platform, and we expect it to perform the same. And fundamentally, it's been proven now that does not happen. And finally, last thing against mobile web is the idea of accessing native devices in terms of sensors, such as GPS, in terms of cameras and phones and things like that. It is just very, very difficult. And by the time you finish it, it looks so unnatural and unintuitive in a mobile web process. Mm-hmm. Magnet is a strong proponent of native application. We believe that's the best way to engage your users because fundamental to everything that we're building today, user adoption is key. Mm-hmm. We want to make sure they use this in their daily lives, and nothing worse than a not performing or unfamiliar infrastructure or an application. So we propose mobile native.
Right.
And our software is available in iOS and Android in native format, so they can just pretty much bring it into their natural development process. They don't have to do anything extra.
Right. And I think two things interesting to that point is when you think about Facebook even, they might have started with web-based and then very soon went to native as well. So when you really start to think about getting the best out of, all the technology built into that little computer, which we call our smartphone, nowadays, and you want to take advantage of all those things, geolocation sensors, things like that, native is really the way to go, in that perspective. And so it's really, so I can, I completely agree with that. And then I'm just curious when, if our customers here want to try this or they want to play around with the APIs to see what the power of adding messaging looks like to their existing app or maybe try creating a new app, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yes, a couple of options here. Obviously, Magnet provides this mobile message feature in a SaaS format, meaning you can come to magnet.com, you can jump into our developer.magnet.com website. Once you're there, we provide a hosted application set so you can actually play and build and deploy your mobile application all within our framework for free. And then after that, of course, we have different ways to deploy the final solution. In a SaaS format, information are being shared, but there is a definitely multi-tenant situation where your information is kept private. However, if sensitivity to privacy security is very, very high, we also support a dedicated private cloud deployment of Magnet Message. Finally, for those people who have a lot of compliance issue where ultimate information security and privacy is required, we also allow on-premise deployment where they can put Magnet Message in a server fashion behind a firewall in the data center.
Okay, great. That plays back to the flexibility that we offer the benefit. So what I'd like to do is, hopefully this has given you a flavor of, what you can do with enterprise mobile. And if you've had certain starts and, they've not gone very far, or you're looking to, for new creative ways to get people, your employees or your consumers to re-engage with your brand, then messaging is definitely that backbone. Because when you really think about it, how many of us spend so much of our time in messaging-based apps, right? It's a two-way communication. It's very different from push notifications or just SMS-based messaging, which ends up being a one-way interaction. And we all know that in today's world, it's much more easier to switch brands than it was in the past, and people switch. So the more you can engage those users, the more you can engage with them right when they need it and provide them the ability to interact with you in a two-way fashion. Messaging is what enables that. So it's really become the backbone of mobile. And so if you really want to then leverage that messaging, build it as part of your app development process. That's really the fastest way to get to market. And you plan for that upfront. So you don't build sort of the static app, information-centric app, but you plan to build this messaging right from the get-go and take advantage of those components, as Tom mentioned, to build that messaging. So you're not reinventing the wheel. You're not focusing on something that's not your core competency, but you really leave it to a vendor who can provide you with the best enterprise-grade solution that's available. And that's where we focus. We think this opportunity is huge. We think, as I mentioned earlier, the mobile revolution has yet to hit the enterprise in a meaningful fashion. It's there in fits and starts and in certain groups, maybe, but it's not really pervasive the way it has hit the consumer world. So we think the opportunity is tremendous for you to mobilize your workforce and to really bring those productivity gains promised by mobile for all these years, right? The hype's been sort of around, as we've all seen. So our goal is to really help you take advantage of mobile in a way that that really keeps those users engaged and is tailored to communicate in a way that they like to be communicated with, which is through messaging. So again, just to summarize very quickly on Magnet, the reason we say that we have a very experienced team, as you heard from Tom's experience as well. We've been around. We're not just a new kid on the block. We've been around, and we have some customers who can attest to this as well. So again, just want to make sure they're a credible vendor, and you can definitely check us out and also play with the solution, because there's nothing like trying and seeing for yourself what the benefit looks like. So if you're in IT and you want to bring on your iOS or Android developer and have them come to our developer site, developer.magnet.com, they can experience the benefit of messaging as part of their enterprise mobile app for themselves. And then definitely, as always, we look for feedback, we look for your comments. So if you have any of that, you can email us at info@magnet.com, and we can assure you that we're standing by to provide additional information. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for your time once again. It's an exciting time, it's an exciting space, and we're excited to partner with you on this journey. Back to you, Kyle. Thank you.
All right. I would like to thank Renu Upadhyay and Tom Koo for taking the time to join us today, and I would also like to thank Magnet Systems, Inc. for making this event possible. And as always, thank you for taking the time to join us. Have a great rest of your day.